So I'm going to dig in a little bit to how building transparency and EC3 are really driving as one of our core missions, and actually what we're funded to do, support procurement policy through partnership with the CLF, but also just through how the tool works. And to start, I think there is policy that's public, but there's also private policy. So there are good examples from both the private and public sector now in terms of how this policy is beginning to roll out. And there are kind of key themes and trends that we're seeing in terms of how EC3 can support what's being proposed. And this is just a repeat of Megan's slide, and then a call out to everyone to go check out that policy toolkit that the CLF has established, where a lot of this information can be found. So just to walk through the policies and how EC3 is currently supporting policy that is implemented. I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly to get to the tool, but the Bike Clean California Act is similar to what's being proposed in Washington when it comes to requiring EPDs for a core group of materials, and then making those EPDs have certain requirements around whether they're plant specific, and then setting limits. And they just published the limits that they are proposing this month, which now will have to be complied with on all public projects in California. So the way that EC3 is supporting this tool, I'll walk through this and show an example, but we actually have a compliance filter within the tool where it will filter down to the EPDs that meet the requirements. We're currently building in these limits so that when you click the Bike Clean California compliance filter, only the EPDs that meet all of the requirements of the bill would return in your search. King County locally is also doing something with EPD requests and then requirements, and then establishing a maximum GWP for concrete by 2024, and utilizing the EC3 tool to both help inform what those GWPs will be, but also proposing it for a compliance mechanism to be able to sort and find EPDs that will meet King County's requirements. The Marin County code policy is more performance driven, but it does give a maximum embodied carbon per cubic meter for the different concrete strengths. And that's something that, again, EC3 can help you source and search if you find mix specific EPDs for your mixes in Marin County to make sure they meet that kilogram of CO2 maximum. And then on the private side, of course, there are projects like the Microsoft Campus project that are utilizing EC3 for the public materials to start to request and require EPDs and then report impacts at the project level for the materials that are included. Beyond that, there's also certification policy. So this is looking at how the Living Future Institute is addressing this in the zero carbon certification, where they are looking at it from a building level, from stage A1 to A5, which is cradle to gate, and then transportation and installation of materials on a site, and allowing both whole building LCA tools and EC3 to be used for the A1 to A3 impacts, and then construction phase reporting for A4 and A5. And then finally, the lead procurement credit that's in pilot, again, looks at the stage A1 to A3 to cradle to gate that we were talking about with the Bike Clean policy here in Washington too, and then starts to categorize certain materials and require reporting and then reductions for a second point. And the EC3 tool can be used for that and has a chart that can actually be exported to show compliance. And then, of course, there's the Bike Clean Washington bill that Megan went through, and I'm going to show a little demo right now, and just in terms of how the tool can be used to really support all of the policies. But before I get there, oh, there's the federal policy too. So many policies. This is another one where they're doing very similar things in this House proposal, which would be an EPD database, a set bill of materials, making compliance through EPDs, and then setting reductions or percent. You have to be under a certain percentage of the returned results to comply. My favorite thing about this one is that they'd be a Bike Clean Gold standard that would actually be the lowest 10% would get a label similar to how Energy Star works for energy on the appliances and things like that. But really, I think Megan has a good slide for this too, but we are seeing this trend as we work with policymakers and really ensure that EC3 tool is set up to help with compliance, that there really are these kind of 4 things that you need to do, or that policies can do, and they can do them differently in terms of the materials included, the requirements for the EPDs, et cetera, what the limits actually are, but really requiring EPDs, utilizing a database to display the compliant EPDs that meet the requirements, setting targets or limits for each material category, and then requiring project teams to submit the data, whether it's just the compliant EPDs or whether it's at the building level with quantities. So those are really the 4 things that we're seeing across all policies, and what the Washington policy is also moving toward. There's my email address if you have any questions on this, but I'm going to go right into a demo now of the tool itself. So if I open up EC3, if you haven't registered yet, you can register at buildingtransparency.org for your free login. The tool is free and open access, which helps us support policy, knowing that you don't have to pay for entry into the tool. Once you're in the tool, it's going to give you, again, all the EPDs that are currently in the tool. So you can see that we are starting to get, when it comes to concretes, really good coverage in Western Washington. One of the things that is something that the bill will have to address is how we incentivize or support smaller manufacturers. I think the size of projects that's being included helps, but getting more coverage across the state, even in any of these places where bills are starting to be developed, is important, and something that the tool helps to inform, just showing you where we have adoption currently. To access the EPD database, the Find and Compare Materials feature is really where you start. And this is where you can go into the material categories. I'm going to pick one that's actually in the Buy Clean California bill to show you how, if you are looking for compliant rebar, because that's one of the categories they're including, you can go to rebar, click next, and not
Stacy,
do anything. Yep.
we're just seeing your slide, not the.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'll just change my. I won't have to go through too much. So just starting over very quickly, here's again, when you just log in, this map that you can toggle through to get to the United States, and then looking at non-concretes and concretes, how many EPDs we have, and where adoption is. And you can see here, we do not have any adoption on the eastern side, either Oregon or Washington, if we're looking at those two proposed policies. So incentivizing adoption and production of EPDs is something that I think bills need to be thinking about. And then over on the left again, if you go to Find and Compare Materials, you can go to steel, then go to rebar, which is included in Buy Clean California. Once you've clicked on that rebar button, just click next. And without putting anything else in, if you just want to find compliant EPDs with the Buy Clean California policy, in this little compliance filter, you can actually select that policy, click search, and it's only going to return you the rebar EPDs that are plant specific, facility specific, that meet their requirements per their policy standards. We are right now building in the limits. So if you clicked this filter, I had that as your search, it would only return the EPDs that were facility specific and under the Buy Clean California limit. So you'd notice by doing that filter that those are the EPDs and the suppliers that would meet the criteria. So that's just one, I think, key implemented example of how it supports policy. When we're looking at the Buy Clean Washington policy, and we're looking at concrete, for instance, and we're starting to try to help inform whether we have good coverage for a policy, again, you can go to concrete and ready mix. You can search just for Washington EPDs. Sorry about that, I'm clicking things a little wrong. Washington. And once you do that search filter, it's going to return all Washington EPDs for ready mix concrete. Of course, we would have a Buy Clean or Washington filter, compliance filter built into this once we know what the actual requirements are to meet the EPD standards. But then you can come down here and do things like compare manufacturers to start to understand, who are the suppliers in Washington state that have EPDs? How many do they have for concrete? Does it seem reasonable to request this? How do we make sure we get more coverage and build out the rest of the state's compliance? You can also see we have the Clf Baselines built into the tool. Those are published baselines that are updated about biannually. We're about to put out a new release of some refined baselines, but you can imagine that we could also have a filter in these views where you could start to have policy limits showing you who's under those limits in this view, as well as allow this to help actually inform the limits that are set once you have the data in the tool with the compliant EPDs. When it comes to the reporting, the other thing, if quantities are something that have to be reported, I'm just going to open up a project. I've gone to Plan and Compare Buildings. I'm just going to pick one of my simple buildings that my son actually completed. But you can see here, this is where you can build a project actually and have the descriptions, the quantity of the material, and then actually where you've selected EPDs or not. So I'm going to go into this concrete one. I'm going to do that search just from here. And I'm going to pretend that I know that my concrete mix that I used was this one. I've now selected it. I'm going to save that by changing it. What you're going to see here is now I've actually selected an EPD. My selected material has an EPD populated for each of these materials that I've included. and I can actually get to a report that will allow me to export this information into a Excel file that then would be something that could be anonymized and sent to a database for compliance and reporting. So if I go over here, you're going to see this is going to give you all the information about the materials, the descriptions, the quantities of materials, the actual realized kilograms of CO2 from the EPDs, what materials were used, links to the EPDs on EC3, but also this total kilograms of CO2 per square feet. And built into EC3, I don't know if you can see that actually, I might have just need to share my other screen. But before I try to do that again, built into EC3 are ways for you to actually also start to do things like level of development, what's included, where did you get your information from, you know, what type of building are you using? And if I do stop share and then share the actual report, again, here's the Excel document where it's going to give you all of that data in a nicely formatted Excel file or a CSV if you're just trying to access the data to go into another database. So I'm going to stop there, I think. But again, the tool is really here to support policy and support reporting and be available for certifications, public policy, private policy to really actually track and realize these savings.